History feels solid and predictable until you notice its strange echoes. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy were both assassinated on a Friday in the presence of their wives and succeeded by men named Johnson. These are not just random quirks, they are eerie historical coincidences that make you question the very nature of chance and destiny. By the end of this journey, you will discover 25 of the most bizarre parallels ever recorded, connections so profound they challenge our entire understanding of the past. We will explore prophetic novels that predicted real-life disasters and twins separated at birth who lived mirror-image lives. Do you ever feel like history is trying to tell us something? The echoes between these two American tragedies are far deeper than their most famous parallels. Both presidents were indeed shot on a Friday, with their first ladies by their side, and both were succeeded by a vice president bearing the surname Johnson. Andrew Johnson, who followed Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon B. Johnson, who took the oath after Kennedy, was born in 1908. The symmetry is already unnerving, but the coincidences spiral further into the realm of the unbelievable when we examine the fates of their assassins. John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald both met their own violent ends before they could stand trial for their crimes, denying the nation a full legal reckoning. And then there are the secretaries, a detail so strange it feels like a historical glitch. President Lincoln reportedly had a secretary named John Kennedy who advised him against his ill-fated visit to Ford's Theater. A century later, President Kennedy had a secretary named Evelyn Lincoln who, according to some accounts, expressed concerns about his planned trip to Dallas. It is as if the same story was being told twice, with the names and dates shuffled by some unseen hand. This is not merely a list of odd facts. It is a pattern so intricate and layered it forces us to wonder if we are looking at random chance or something far more mysterious. From the grand stage of presidential tragedies, we descend into the deeply personal, to a story that makes you question the very concept of individual identity. Meet Jim Lewis and Jim Springer, identical twin brothers separated just a few weeks after their birth in 1940. They were raised by different families in different parts of Ohio, completely unaware of the other's existence. It was not until they were 39 years old that they were finally reunited, and what they discovered was far more than a shared face. The first shock was their names. Both adoptive families, with no communication whatsoever, had independently decided to name the boy James. Jim Lewis and Jim Springer both grew up with childhood dogs, and both of those dogs were named Toy. As adults, both men married women named Linda. When those marriages ended in divorce, both men went on to marry a second time, and both of their second wives were named Betty. The parallels extended into their professional lives and personal habits. Both men worked in law enforcement, both enjoyed woodworking as a hobby in their basements, and both took family vacations to the same small beach in Florida. They shared the same peculiar habit of chewing their fingernails down to the quick, and in a detail that feels almost too specific to be real, they both suffered from the same type of tension headaches, drank the same brand of beer, Miller Lite, and even drove the same model and color of car. How could two lives, lived entirely apart, follow such an identical script? This was not a case of shared genetics alone. This was a mirroring of life choices, of names and preferences, that suggests a connection far deeper than science can easily explain. The same cosmic clock that marked the beginning of a life also signaled its end. Mark Twain, the great American author born Samuel Clemens, entered this world in 1835, the very year Halley's comet blazed across the heavens. He always felt a deep personal connection to the celestial wanderer. In fact, he once stated matter-of-factly that he came in with the comet and he would surely go out with it. It was a prediction that would prove to be astonishingly precise. Twain passed away from a heart attack on April 21, 1910. just one day after the comet reached its closest point to Earth, its brilliant tail once again visible in the night sky. He had fulfilled his own prophecy to the letter. This was not a vague astrological notion. It was a specific, timed event that bound his life between two appearances of the same cosmic body, 75 years apart. The coincidence was so powerful it transcended mere trivia, transforming Twain into a legendary figure whose story seemed written in the stars themselves. It makes you wonder if he sensed a thread of destiny woven into his own narrative, a connection so profound it defies simple explanation. Sometimes, a single voice seems to whisper a terrible future into existence. In the final, fading days of the Russian Empire, that voice belonged to a bearded mystic named Grigory Rasputin. He held a strange and powerful influence over Tsar Nicholas II and his wife, Alexandra, because he alone seemed able to ease the suffering of their hemophiliac son, Alexei. This made him many enemies among the Russian aristocracy, who saw him as a corrupting force destroying the monarchy from within. In December 1916, a group of nobles decided he had to be eliminated. But Rasputin, sensing the danger closing in, delivered a chilling prophecy. He declared that if he were killed by aristocrats, the entire Romanov royal family would be dead within 2 years. The men who plotted against him must have dismissed it as the ravings of a madman, but they were about to discover how difficult it would be to silence that voice. They first invited Rasputin to a palace and served him cakes and wine laced with enough cyanide to kill several men. He ate and drank freely, showing no ill effects whatsoever. Frustrated and terrified, one of the conspirators then shot him in the back. Rasputin fell, but as they approached his body, he suddenly rose, attacked his assailant, and stumbled out into the snowy courtyard. Another conspirator shot him again, and then a third. They finally subdued him, bound him in a carpet, and threw his body into the freezing Neva River. When his corpse was recovered days later, the official cause of death was drowning. He had survived poison and multiple gunshots only to succumb to the icy water. His murderers had succeeded, but in doing so, they had perfectly fulfilled the first condition of his curse. Almost exactly 2 years later, in July 1918, Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children were taken to a basement and executed by Bolshevik revolutionaries, ending the 300-year Romanov dynasty. The mystic's final words were not a threat, but a prediction that came true with terrifying precision. From the cosmic to the deeply intimate, the next story is one of tragic repetition. It concerns 2 poets, Sylvia Plath and Assia Weville, whose lives and deaths became a dark, interwoven tale. Plath, the brilliant American poet, was married to the British poet Ted Hughes. Their marriage was passionate but ultimately fractured when Hughes began a relationship with Assia Weville. Plath's devastation fueled some of her most powerful and anguished work before she died by suicide in February 1963, using the gas oven in her London flat. 6 years later, in March 1969, Assia Weville, who had been living with Ted Hughes, made the same terrible choice. She also died by suicide using a gas oven, and it was in the very same London flat where Sylvia Plath had died. The coincidence is so stark it feels less like chance and more like a curse. Both women were artists, both were entangled with the same man, and both met their end in the same horrifying way in the same physical space. Their poetry often wrestled with themes of love, betrayal, and death, making their real-life stories a grim extension of their art. This is not merely a sad historical footnote. It is a chilling echo that binds 2 souls together in a narrative of shared tragedy, forcing us to ponder the invisible threads that can connect one life to another and one death to the next. Long before the Titanic ever sailed, its story was already written. In 1898, a full 14 years before the great ship's doomed maiden voyage, an American author named Morgan Robertson penned a novella titled Futility. The book told the story of a massive, luxurious ocean liner, the largest of its kind ever built, hailed by its creators as practically unsinkable. Its name was the Titan. On a cold April night, while traveling at high speed across the North Atlantic, the Titan struck an iceberg and sank, resulting in a catastrophic loss of life because the vessel carried far too few lifeboats for all its passengers. The parallels are so precise they are chilling. Robertson's fictional Titan and the real-life Titanic were both described as the largest ships afloat. Both were triple-screw steamers, and both met their end in the North Atlantic in the month of April after colliding with an iceberg. The similarities do not stop there. The Titan was 800 feet long, while the Titanic measured 882 feet. The Titan could carry 3,000 people but had lifeboats for only a fraction of that number, a tragic foreshadowing of the Titanic's own fatal shortage. How could a writer, over a decade before the event, predict such a specific disaster with such uncanny accuracy? It is as if he glimpsed a page from a future history book. This was not just a story, it was a prophecy published for anyone to read, a warning that went entirely unheeded until the icy waters of the Atlantic made it devastatingly real. While some fates seem woven from cosmic threads, others appear to be written by the storm itself. Few lives were as entangled with raw elemental force as that of Roy Sullivan, a park ranger in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park. This man was not just unlucky, he was a statistical miracle in the most terrifying sense, struck by lightning on 7 separate, confirmed occasions. The odds of any single person being struck in their lifetime are astronomically low, around 1 in 15,000. To be struck 7 times is a number so improbable it borders on the impossible, a fluke of nature that earned him the nickname the human lightning rod. His first encounter came in 1942 when he was hiding from a storm in a fire lookout tower that took a direct hit, losing just a big toenail. The second strike in 1969 set his eyebrows on fire while he was driving a truck. The third, in 1970, hit him while he was in his own front yard. The fourth strike set his hair on fire at a park ranger station, and the fifth, in 1976, sent him fleeing for his car only to be struck again through an open window. Each strike left its mark, from burned hair and singed clothing to scars that mapped his body like a lightning chart. The psychological toll was immense. He carried a can of water with him everywhere, terrified his hair would ignite without warning. He grew deeply paranoid of storms, and his 7th and final strike in 1977, while he was fishing, seemed to confirm his cursed status. The universe, it seemed, had a singular and relentless focus on one man. In a tragic twist, this man who had cheated death by lightning so many times ultimately died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound in 1983. His incredible story forces a haunting question. Was he the unluckiest man alive, or was he, in some strange way, a living conductor for the sky's most violent energy, a person whose very existence defied the laws of probability until the pressure of his own strange destiny became too much to bear? Even the most powerful ruler can meet his mirror image in the most unexpected of places. In the spring of 1900, King Umberto I of Italy decided to take a quiet, informal meal at a small, unassuming restaurant in the city of Monza. He was greeted by the establishment's owner, a man named Umberto. To the king's astonishment, this man was his exact double, a perfect look-alike in every feature. The two men began to talk, and the coincidences quickly spiraled from a simple physical resemblance into something far more profound. They discovered they had both been born in the city of Turin on the exact same day, March 14, 1844. Both had been given the same first name, and the parallels did not stop with their own lives. The restaurant owner revealed that he had married a woman named Margherita, which was also the name of the king's own queen. Even more incredibly, both couples had been married on the very same day. It was as if two identical lives were unfolding on parallel tracks, one on the throne and one behind a counter. The king, deeply unsettled yet fascinated by this encounter, reportedly invited his doppelganger to attend a local athletics event the following day, August 29. But fate had a final, terrible symmetry in store. On that day, an anarchist approached the king's carriage and assassinated him with 3 gunshots. At that very same hour, back in his restaurant, the owner Umberto was inexplicably handling a pistol when it accidentally discharged, killing him instantly. 2 men who shared a face, a name, and a birthday now shared the same final day. This story goes far beyond a simple case of mistaken identity. It presents a puzzle of intertwined destinies, a cosmic joke with a deadly punchline that makes you wonder if some lives are so deeply linked that not even death can tell them apart. Numbers can sometimes carry a weight far beyond their mathematical value, becoming symbols etched into history itself. The tragic events of September 11, 2001 are a stark example, and in their aftermath, a web of numerical coincidences emerged that many found impossible to ignore. The date itself, September 11th or 9/11, was just the beginning. September 11th is the 254th day of the year. When you add those digits together, 2 plus 5 plus 4, the sum is 11. The first plane to strike the World Trade Center was American Airlines Flight 11. This flight carried 92 people, and 9 plus 2 also equals 11. The flight had 11 crew members on board. The name of the city targeted, New York City, holds a deeper historical link, as New York was the 11th state to ratify the Constitution and join the Union. The resonance of the number 11 seemed to appear everywhere people looked, from the Twin Towers themselves, which stood side by side like a giant number 11, to the timing of the attacks, creating a pattern that felt too deliberate to be random. These numerical echoes do not offer an explanation for the tragedy, nor do they imply a hidden meaning behind the attacks themselves. Instead, they highlight how the human mind seeks order and patterns, especially in the face of chaos and profound loss. The sheer volume of these occurrences, all pointing to the same number, has fueled endless speculation and cemented the number 11 as an indelible, haunting part of the story. It is a phenomenon that transforms a simple digit into a permanent, somber reminder, making the event feel strangely preordained in the pages of a cosmic calendar. The prophetic warnings of the Titanic disaster did not end with a single author. In fact, 2 of the most famous writers on board the ill-fated liner had already penned their own fictional versions of its doom. Jacques Futrelle was an American mystery writer celebrated for his brilliant detective character, Professor Augustus S. F. X. Van Dusen, also known as the Thinking Machine. In one of his stories, he wrote about a massive, unsinkable ocean liner named the Titan. Across the Atlantic, the British journalist and spiritualist William T. Stead was an equally influential figure. He had written 2 deeply unsettling pieces. The first, published in 1886, was a fictional article titled How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic, which depicted a steamer sinking with great loss of life due to a shortage of lifeboats. In a later story, he described a passenger on a sinking ship being saved by a woman on a passing vessel named the Titanic. Their fictions were not just vague premonitions. They were detailed, specific, and chillingly accurate. Yet, when the opportunity arose to sail on the real, magnificent Titanic in April 1912, both men accepted. They were traveling as first-class passengers, and when the ship struck the iceberg, both men faced the same terrible reality they had once only imagined. Jacques Futrelle reportedly helped his wife into a lifeboat, then stepped back onto the deck, smoking a cigarette and accepting his fate with the calm logic of one of his own characters. His body was never recovered. William T. Stead was last seen calmly reading a book in the first-class smoking lounge as the water rose around him. He had become a character in his own tragic prophecy. The coincidence is staggering. These were not just passengers, they were storytellers who had, in essence, written the script for their own deaths. Their presence on that ship transforms their fiction from mere coincidence into a form of eerie, self-fulfilling prophecy, as if they were drawn irresistibly toward the very disaster they had envisioned. It forces us to ask whether they sensed the shadow of their own destinies in the words they put to paper. The bitter rivalry between two American titans ended with a final, impossible act of harmony. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, once the closest of friends, became fierce political enemies, their falling out so complete they did not speak for over a decade. Yet in their final years, they began a heartfelt correspondence, setting aside their political differences to rediscover the bond forged in the fire of revolution. Their reconciliation was a quiet, private affair, a testament to the enduring power of friendship over ideology. Then came July 4, 1826. The nation was preparing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, a document they had both been instrumental in creating. On that momentous day, as bells rang out across the young country, both of these aged patriots lay on their deathbeds hundreds of miles apart. Thomas Jefferson died first at his Monticello estate around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. A few hours later, in Massachusetts, John Adams drew his final breath. His last words, whispered into the quiet of the room, were a testament to the friend he thought still lived. He said, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." He did not know that Jefferson had already passed. The timing of their deaths is so perfectly symbolic it feels like a piece of national poetry. These two men, who had argued so fiercely over the very soul of the nation, chose to exit the stage together on its most sacred birthday, as if their shared legacy was ultimately more powerful than their divisions. It was a final, profound coincidence that seemed to stitch the young country back together, a reminder that the foundation they built was stronger than any disagreement. While two famous authors may have sailed toward their fictional fates, a single, silent passenger was destined for a double dose of disaster. There is a book that holds the grim distinction of being linked to both the Titanic and the Lusitania. Its story begins with a London bookseller named Sangorsky and Sutcliffe, who decided to create the most magnificent book the world had ever seen. They chose to produce a lavish edition of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of ancient Persian poetry. This was no ordinary volume. It was a masterpiece of the bookbinder's art, bound in fine leather and encrusted with over 1,000 precious stones, including rubies, topazes, and emeralds. Its pages were gilded with gold leaf, and it featured elaborate tooling. It was, by all accounts, a priceless object, and it was booked for passage to New York aboard the grandest ship in the world, the RMS Titanic. Of course, the book, like so many other treasures, was lost to the Atlantic depths when the ship went down in April 1912. The story, however, does not end there. The publishing house, determined to see their vision reach the public, commissioned a second, equally opulent copy. This replacement volume was completed 3 years later, and in May 1915, it was carefully crated and placed aboard another renowned ocean liner, the RMS Lusitania, for its journey to America. As the Lusitania sailed into the waters off the coast of Ireland, it was struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat. The ship sank in a mere 18 minutes, taking nearly 1,200 lives with it, and sending the second priceless Rubaiyat to a watery grave alongside the first. The odds of this happening are beyond calculation. This was not just any book, but a one-of-a-kind, handmade artifact. For that specific object to be connected to the two most famous maritime disasters of the era, 3 years apart, defies all reason. It is as if the book itself was cursed, or as if some unseen force was determined that this particular collection of poetry should never reach its destination. The voyages of the Titanic and the Lusitania were separated by time and circumstance, yet they are forever linked by the story of this one beautiful, ill-fated book. The curse of the White Star Line did not end with the Titanic. There was a third sister, the Britannic, conceived as part of the same grand Olympic class of liners. In the wake of the Titanic disaster, her design was radically altered. She was given a double hull, her watertight compartments were raised, and she carried more than enough lifeboats for everyone on board. She was, by every measure, the safest ship afloat, a direct response to her sister's tragic flaws. When the Great War began, she was pressed into service not as a luxury liner, but as a hospital ship, painted brilliant white with giant red crosses on her sides. It must have felt like a new, safer chapter. Yet on the morning of November 21, 1916, while steaming through the Aegean Sea, a violent explosion tore through her hull. She had struck a German naval mine. The captain immediately gave the order to abandon ship, confident that the new safety features would keep her afloat long enough to evacuate. But a tragic oversight sealed her fate. In an effort to ventilate the ship, nurses had opened the portholes to let in the fresh Mediterranean air. As the Britannic listed, water poured through these open windows, flooding the compartments that were meant to keep her safe. She sank in just 55 minutes, a hauntingly familiar demise. The coincidences, however, run far deeper than two ships from the same company meeting a watery end. They sank in eerily similar locations, both in the cold waters of the Northern Hemisphere, with the Britannic going down not far from where ancient myths spoke of sea monsters and lost civilizations. Even more chilling are the human connections. On board the Britannic that day was Violet Jessop, a stewardess who had survived the sinking of the Titanic 4 years earlier. As the Britannic sank beneath her, she was forced to jump into the sea, nearly being sucked into the ship's spinning propellers. She survived again, becoming one of the very few people in history to have endured the sinkings of both sister ships. How does one person find themselves at the center of the same nightmare twice? The story of the Britannic is not merely a postscript to the Titanic. It is the echo of a tragedy, a ghost ship from the same family, built to correct a fatal mistake yet unable to escape the same dark destiny. It feels less like bad luck and more like a pattern, a repeated lesson from history that we were never meant to forget. The line between fiction and true crime can become terrifyingly thin. Decades before the term was even coined, Edgar Allan Poe wrote what many consider the first modern detective story, and in doing so, he may have inadvertently solved a murder from beyond the grave. The case began with the very real, very brutal death of Mary Cecilia Rogers, a young woman whose body was found in the Hudson River in 1841. Her murder was a media sensation in New York City, but it remained stubbornly unsolved, a mystery that haunted the public imagination. Poe, ever the literary entrepreneur, saw a compelling story. He took the facts of the Rogers case and transposed them to Paris, changing the victim's name to Marie Roget for his story, The Mystery of Marie Roget. In this fictional account, his detective, the brilliant C. Auguste Dupin, meticulously analyzes newspaper reports and witness statements, applying a form of early forensic reasoning. Dupin concludes that the young woman was not killed by a gang of ruffians, as the popular theory went, but by a single, powerful man she knew intimately, a naval officer who had murdered her in a fit of passionate rage. Poe published his story in installments, presenting it as a bold attempt to actually solve the real crime using pure logic. For years, it remained a fascinating literary curiosity, a work of fiction that claimed to be fact. Then, decades after Poe's own mysterious death, a man named John Anderson, who had been Mary Rogers' employer and was rumored to have been her lover, was on his deathbed. With his final breaths, he confessed to his role in her death. He revealed that Mary had died from a botched abortion, a procedure that had been arranged to terminate his child, and that her body had been disposed of in the river to cover up the scandal. This confession aligned with stunning precision with the solution Poe had crafted for his fictional detective. The naval officer in his story was a stand-in for a specific type of man, one with the social standing and motive to commit such an act and orchestrate a cover-up. How could a writer, working only from newspaper clippings and his own brilliant intuition, piece together the truth that eluded the entire police force? This is more than a writer getting lucky with a guess. It is a bizarre loop where a fictional narrative reached back into reality and closed a cold case, as if Poe's imagination had tapped into the very facts of the crime. He wrote mysteries for a living, but in this one strange instance, his fiction became the key to a real-life lock, leaving us to wonder if some stories are simply waiting for the right storyteller to set them free. A name can carry the weight of a world. For Colonel Paul Tibbets, the pilot chosen for the most devastating mission in history, the name of his aircraft was a tribute to the woman who gave him life, his mother, Enola Gay Tibbets. He had the words Enola Gay painted on the nose of his B-29 Superfortress, a personal touch on a machine built for impersonal destruction. On the morning of August 6, 1945, that plane carried a single bomb, codenamed Little Boy, toward the Japanese city of Hiroshima. But here is where the personal and the historical collide in a way that defies simple understanding. The man responsible for arming the atomic bomb in flight was Navy Captain William Deke Parsons. As the Enola Gay approached its target, it was Parsons who climbed into the bomb bay to perform the delicate, final act of inserting the explosive charge into the weapon, making it live. So you have a plane named for a loving mother, carrying a bomb armed by a man whose surname, Parsons, is hauntingly close to the phrase for son. The Enola Gay, in a grimly literal sense, gave birth to the destructive force of Little Boy. This is not a conspiracy, but a coincidence of names and roles so perfectly aligned it feels like a dark pun written into the fabric of history. The most intimate of names, a mother's, became forever linked to the most cataclysmic of acts. It forces a chilling question about the nature of legacy and how the threads of our personal lives can become, without our intent or knowledge, woven into the tapestry of global events. The same cosmic force that seemed to curse a park ranger with lightning blessed others with a different kind of elemental power, the pure, random chance of a lottery win. For most, a single jackpot is a once-in-a-lifetime miracle, but for a select few, the universe seems to hit the repeat button. Take Evelyn Adams, a woman from New Jersey who won the state lottery not once, but twice in the mid-1980s. Her first win in 1985 brought her a prize of $1.5 million. Just 4 months later, she bought another ticket and won again, this time for a staggering $2.5 million. The odds of winning the New Jersey lottery twice were calculated to be around 1 in 17 trillion. To put that in perspective, you are statistically more likely to be struck by lightning on 7 different occasions than to accomplish what she did. And yet, her story is not entirely unique. A Polish man named Jan Kowalski won a substantial national lottery prize, a life-changing sum that should have been the final word on his luck. Years later, his adult son, buying a ticket for a completely separate lottery draw, won a massive jackpot of his own. The mathematical probability of 2 immediate family members, completely independent of one another, both hitting a national lottery, is a number so vast it is essentially meaningless in human terms. What does this mean for our understanding of luck? Are people like Evelyn Adams and the Kowalski family simply statistical outliers, the inevitable 1 in 17 trillion fluke that must occur somewhere to someone? Or does it suggest that luck itself might be a tangible force, a quality that somehow clings to certain individuals, making them conduits for fortune in the same way Roy Sullivan was a conduit for lightning? These stories force us to confront the very limits of probability, challenging the comforting idea that chance is a purely random and democratic force. Perhaps for a rare few, the wheel of fortune is not a wheel at all, but a door that, once opened, never fully closes. Sometimes a world-changing idea seems to arrive all at once. On February 14, 1876, 2 men raced to the same destination with the same revolutionary device, a machine that could transmit the human voice over a wire. Alexander Graham Bell, a teacher of the deaf, and Elisha Gray, a prolific electrical inventor, both filed patent applications for the telephone on that very same day. This was not a case of industrial espionage or stolen secrets. It was a stunning example of simultaneous discovery, a moment when the collective knowledge of an era seems to converge, making a specific breakthrough almost inevitable. The drama, however, lies in the details of that race. Bell's lawyer submitted his patent application just a few hours before Gray's lawyer filed a document known as a caveat, which was essentially a notice of an invention he intended to patent fully in the near future. That narrow window of a few hours created a legal and historical controversy that would last for decades. Who truly arrived first? The question is not as simple as it seems, because Gray's caveat actually contained a key technical detail, a liquid transmitter, that was arguably more advanced than the method described in Bell's initial filing. This single day created a bitter dispute over who deserved the title of the telephone's true inventor. It forces us to wonder about the nature of genius itself. Was Bell simply the faster runner to the patent office, or was he the more driven visionary? Perhaps the telephone was an idea whose time had simply come, a ghost of a future technology that chose to materialize through two different minds at the very same moment, leaving us to forever debate which hand first pulled it into our world. A city devoted to spectacle was preparing for its grandest show. On August 24th, in the year 79, the people of Pompeii were anticipating a day of brutal entertainment, a gladiatorial contest scheduled for their massive amphitheater. They could not have known that the true performance would come from the mountain looming over their city. As Mount Vesuvius began to rumble and spew ash into the sky, the scheduled games created a cruel and poignant irony. Were the gladiators already in their barracks preparing their armor and weapons? Had the crowds begun to gather, buzzing with excitement for the blood sport to come? The archaeological record provides haunting clues. Excavations revealed gladiator barracks near the amphitheater, and within them the remains of men who never made it to the arena. They were found still in chains, trapped not by an opponent but by the volcanic hell raining down upon them. The very symbols of their profession, their helmets and greaves, were left behind as they futilely tried to escape. This was not a quiet end. It was a catastrophic interruption, freezing a vibrant city at the precise moment it was poised for communal celebration. The amphitheater, a place designed for staged death, became the backdrop for a real-life tragedy of unimaginable scale. The symbolism is inescapable. A society that gathered to watch simulated doom was utterly consumed by the real thing, its final act forever memorialized in volcanic rock and ash. It makes you wonder if the mountain itself was the ultimate gladiator, an unstoppable force that demanded a sacrifice far greater than any the games could ever provide. The sheer improbability of a double misfire feels like a statistical miracle, yet it is precisely what saved President Andrew Jackson on a cold January day in 1835. As he left a funeral service at the Capitol building, a man named Richard Lawrence stepped from the crowd, produced a single shot daring a pistol, and fired at the president's back from point-blank range. The gunpowder sparked, but the weapon failed to discharge. In an instant, Lawrence pulled a second, identical pistol from his coat and pulled the trigger again. For a second time, the gun misfired, leaving Jackson unharmed and enraged. The odds of two separate, newly loaded pistols failing in such rapid succession are astronomically low, estimated at less than 1 in 125,000. The 70-year-old president, a man known for his fiery temper, did not retreat. Instead, he charged his assailant, beating Richard Lawrence repeatedly with his heavy wooden cane until others could subdue the man. The investigation that followed concluded that Lawrence was profoundly insane, believing he was the rightful heir to the English throne and that Jackson was withholding his royal payments. This was the first known attempt to assassinate a sitting American president, and it failed not because of security or intervention, but because of a mechanical fluke that felt almost supernatural. You have to wonder, was it simply a case of old gunpowder and faulty percussion caps, Or was there something more at play, protecting a man whose stubborn will had already defied so many political and personal threats? Jackson himself certainly believed the latter. He became convinced that the dual misfires were a sign of divine providence, a direct intervention that preserved his life. In a nation still defining itself, the survival of its fiery leader on the Capitol steps felt less like a lucky break and more like a deliberate act of fate. A story can sometimes loop back to trap its own author in a web of unbearable irony. Decades before the modern detective novel was fully formed, a writer named Anna Katharine Green published a book called The Leavenworth Case in 1878. It was a sensational bestseller, credited with helping to shape the entire mystery genre, and its plot centered on a shocking death by arsenic poisoning. For years, Green enjoyed the fame and success that came from crafting a perfect fictional crime, the poison in her pages nothing more than a clever device. Then, in 1935, the fiction bled into her own life with a devastating precision. Her sister, Katharine Green, was found dead in her home. The official cause of death was arsenic poisoning, and the case was ruled a suicide. Yet, from the very beginning, the circumstances were clouded with doubt and unanswered questions, creating a real-life mystery that mirrored the one she had written over 5 decades earlier. How does a writer process such a horrifying echo? The very substance she had used as a tool for entertainment had become the instrument of her own sister's demise. This was not a vague thematic parallel. It was a direct, chilling repetition of the method of death from her most famous work. The official ruling of suicide never fully quieted the whispers, leaving a permanent stain of suspicion on the tragedy. Did Anna Katharine Green, the master of fictional intrigue, ever look back at her own novel and see a terrible premonition she had failed to recognize? It is a coincidence that transforms a celebrated author into a tragic figure, forever linked to a real-life mystery as dark and unsolvable as any she ever put to paper. A single year can become a tombstone for an entire era. The year 476 is etched into history as the official end of the Western Roman Empire, the moment a Germanic king named Odoacer deposed the last emperor, a boy ironically named Romulus Augustulus. It was more than a political collapse. It was the symbolic closing of the ancient world, a descent into the cultural fragmentation we now call the Dark Ages. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman Empire had been the sun around which Western civilization orbited, and its fall in the West cast a long shadow. But the story of Rome was not over. In the East, the empire lived on, centered in the magnificent city of Constantinople. We know it today as the Byzantine Empire, a direct continuation of the Roman state that preserved its laws, its Greek-infused culture, and its imperial grandeur for another millennium. This eastern bastion finally met its end in 1453, when the Ottoman Turks breached the legendary walls of Constantinople. Now consider the span of time between these two epochal events. The Western Empire fell in 476, the Eastern Empire fell in 1453. If you subtract 476 from 1453, the result is 977 years. The symmetry is not mathematically perfect, but it is profoundly symbolic. It creates a near millennium-long bracket around the entire Roman imperial tradition, a clean, almost poetic bookending of one of history's greatest chapters. This is not a causal link, but a chronological coincidence of staggering scale. It is as if history itself took a deep breath for nearly 1,000 years between the fall of the First Rome and the fall of the Second, framing the life and death of an empire with a sense of epic finality. How could two events so far apart create such a neat conceptual package? It forces us to see history not just as a chaotic sequence, but as a narrative with its own strange sense of structure and rhythm. Finding a lost book seems like a simple twist of luck, but for Anthony Hopkins, it became a perfect alignment of actor and role. While preparing for his part in the 1974 film The Girl from Petrovka, Hopkins was desperate to get his hands on a copy of the original novel by George Pfeiffer. He searched all over London, scouring bookshops without any success, and was about to give up hope. Then, one day, he was waiting for a train and noticed a lone book sitting on a bench. He picked it up, and to his astonishment, it was the very novel he had been searching for, The Girl from Petrovka. He took it as an incredible piece of good fortune and used it for his research. The story could have ended there, a happy little anecdote, but the true coincidence was yet to reveal itself. Some time later, Hopkins finally met the author, George Pfeiffer. During their conversation, Pfeiffer mentioned with great frustration that he had lost his own personal copy of the book. It was his only annotated version, filled with his own notes and marginalia, and it had gone missing somewhere in London. Intrigued, Hopkins asked for a description. The details Pfeiffer provided matched the book Hopkins had found on the bench perfectly. The actor had not just found any copy of the novel. He had miraculously found the author's own lost, annotated copy, the one item in the world that could give him the deepest possible insight into the story he was about to portray on screen. The odds of this specific book, lost by one man and needed by another, finding its way between them on a random city bench, are beyond calculation. This was not merely a case of serendipity. It was as if the story itself reached out and connected the creator with his interpreter through a lost artifact, ensuring the performance was imbued with the author's original intent. How many other invisible threads like this one connect people and events, weaving a pattern of chance so intricate it feels like destiny? For some, a single maritime disaster is a life-altering tragedy, but for one man, it became a grim and recurring pattern. John Priest was a fireman, one of the men who labored in the sweltering heat of a ship's boiler room, shoveling coal to keep the great engines running. His career was a testament to endurance, but it was also marked by a series of escapes so improbable they defy belief. Before the Titanic ever set sail, Priest was serving aboard her sister ship, the Olympic. In September 1911, the Olympic was involved in a serious collision with a British warship, the HMS Hawke, off the coast of England. The Olympic was badly gashed and had to be towed back to port, but it did not sink. Priest had survived his first brush with catastrophe. Less than a year later, he found himself assigned to the Titanic for its maiden voyage. When the ship struck the iceberg, Priest was deep in the bowels of the vessel, surrounded by the roar of machinery and the intense heat of the furnaces. He fought his way up through the tilting corridors and managed to find a place in one of the last lifeboats to be launched, lifeboat number 15. He watched from the freezing water as the great ship plunged beneath the waves, taking more than 1,500 souls with it. He had survived again, yet his ordeal was not over. When war broke out, Priest, perhaps seeking steady work, signed on with the third sister of the Olympic class, the Britannic, which had been converted into a hospital ship. On November 21, 1916, history repeated itself with a terrible familiarity. A massive explosion rocked the ship. Priest, once again, was in the boiler room when the mine struck. He scrambled for the decks and for the second time in 4 years found himself abandoning a giant ocean liner. The Britannic sank even faster than the Titanic. Somehow, John Priest emerged from the water alive, completing a trilogy of survival that is utterly unique in recorded history. What does it mean to be this unlucky and yet this lucky? He was a man who seemed to be a magnet for the worst maritime disasters of his era, yet he possessed an almost supernatural ability to walk away from them. His life forces us to confront a haunting question. Was he blessed with an incredible talent for survival, or was he cursed to repeatedly witness the deaths of ships and crewmates, a living reminder of the ocean's unpredictable power? The same principles of chance that govern lottery wins and lightning strikes seem etched into the very stones of our ancient past. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands as a monument not just to a pharaoh, but to a series of mathematical coincidences so precise they have baffled scholars for centuries. Its original dimensions appear to encode the value of pi, the mathematical constant defining the relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter. If you take the pyramid's perimeter and divide it by twice its original height, the result is a figure extraordinarily close to pi. This is a number that would not be formally calculated in the Western world for thousands of years. Further deepening the mystery, the proportions of the pyramid's faces seem to align with the golden ratio, approximately 1.618, a number often found in nature's most beautiful patterns, from the spiral of a nautilus shell to the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower. Beyond these numerical puzzles, the pyramid's alignment to the cardinal directions is an engineering marvel in itself. Its base is oriented to true north with an accuracy of just a fraction of a single degree, a feat that would challenge modern surveyors with advanced technology. How could a civilization from the Bronze Age achieve such perfection? Mainstream Egyptology points to the incredible skill, patience, and practical astronomy of the ancient builders, suggesting they used the stars to achieve this alignment and developed their geometry through generations of trial and observation. Yet, the sheer prevalence of these cosmic numbers has fueled alternative theories for generations. Could these be more than just coincidences? The idea persists that the pyramid's architects possessed a form of advanced knowledge that was later lost to history, or that they were guided by a wisdom from beyond our world. This makes the pyramid a permanent question mark in the desert, a riddle in limestone and geometry that continues to challenge our understanding of human history itself. The final minute of the First World War holds a story of such profound and bitter irony it can feel like a deliberate act of historical cruelty. At 10:59 in the morning on November 11, 1918, just 60 seconds before the armistice was to take effect, an American soldier named Henry Gunther fixed his bayonet and charged toward a German machine gun nest. The German soldiers, already aware the war was moments from ending, saw him coming and waved him away, shouting for him to turn back. But Gunther, driven by a complex mix of duty, desperation, or perhaps sheer momentum, continued his solitary advance. The machine gun fired a single burst, and Henry Gunther fell, becoming the very last soldier to be killed in a conflict that had already claimed millions of lives. His death was not part of a grand final battle. It was a small, isolated incident on a quiet front, the ultimate symbol of a war that consumed men right up to its arbitrary finish line. The order to cease all hostilities had been issued, but in the age of unreliable field telephones and runner messengers, it had not reached every single unit in time. 1 minute later, at 11 o'clock, the guns fell silent across the Western Front. An eerie, unprecedented quiet descended upon the trenches, a silence that only highlighted the tragic futility of that single, final shot. Henry Gunther's name is now etched in history not for a heroic charge that turned the tide, but for a death that should never have happened. He was a man caught in the gears of a stopping machine, a final, senseless sacrifice that forces us to question the very nature of conflict and the cruel precision of a clock that counted down to peace, yet could not save one more soul. From presidential assassinations to identical twins living parallel lives, from prophetic novels to cursed ships, these 25 stories reveal a world where history seems to stutter and repeat. We have journeyed from the intimate tragedies of Sylvia Plath and Assia Weville to the global stage where the fall of empires aligns with near-perfect symmetry. These are not just random quirks of the past, they are echoes that reverberate across centuries, connecting lives and events in ways that defy simple explanation. So what does it all mean? Are these bizarre parallels nothing more than statistical flukes, the inevitable one in a billion chance that must occur somewhere in the vast tapestry of time? Or do they point toward something deeper, a hidden pattern woven into the fabric of reality itself, a rhythm to history that we can only glimpse in these fleeting moments of strange alignment? The answer may be different for each of us. Perhaps these coincidences are a reminder that our lives are more interconnected than we can possibly imagine. bound by threads of chance and destiny we will never fully see. Now we want to hear from you. Which of these 25 coincidences completely blew your mind? Do you have a favorite historical parallel that we missed? Share your thoughts and your own discoveries in the comments below. If you were captivated by these mysteries of our past, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the unknown.